So these two grave diggers at the start of Act 5 are used for comedic relief. The jokes are all based on puns and all kind of constructed out. Your notes can help with these. And so we're going to let this go for a little bit as these two talk. First off, think about the irony of this. They are grave diggers who are going to be making light and joking. And so there's a little situational irony here that should you be making jokes while you're digging a grave for someone who's dead? They're going to play into that. They're going to do a little bit of joking humor. See if you can explain any of the jokes that we see.
Is she to be buried in Christian burial that wilfully seeks her own salvation?
I tell thee she is, and therefore make her grave straight. The crowner hath sat on her and finds it Christian burial.
How can that be, unless she drowned herself in her own defence?
Why, 'tis found so.
It must be so. Offendendo, it cannot be else. For here lies the point. If I drown myself wittingly, it argues an act, and an act hath three branches. It is to act, to do, and to perform. Ergo, she drowned herself wittingly.
Nay, but hear you, good Delver.
Give me leave. Here lies the water. Good. Here stands the man. Good. If the man go to this water and drown himself, it is willy-nilly he goes. Mark you that. But if the water come to him and drown him, he drowns not himself. Ergo, he that is not guilty of his own death shortens not his own life.
But is this law?
Aye, marry it is. Crowner's quest law.
Will you have the truth on't? If this had not been a gentlewoman, she should have been buried out of Christian burial.
Why, there thou sayest. And the more pity that great folk should have countenance in this world to drown or hang themselves more than they're even Christian. Come, my spade. There is no ancient gentleman but gardeners, ditchers, and grave makers. They hold up Adam's profession.
Was he a gentleman?
He was the first that ever bore arms.
Why, he had none.
What? Art a heathen? How dost thou understand the scripture? The scripture says Adam did. Could he dig without arms? I'll put another question to thee. If thou answerest me not to the purpose, confess thyself.
Go to.
What is he that builds stronger than either the mason, the shipwright, or the carpenter?
The gallows maker, eh? For that frame outlives 1,000 tenants.
I like thy wit well, in good faith. The gallows does well, but how does it well? It does again. Come.
Who builds or a carpenter?
I tell me that, and unyoke.
Marry, now I can tell.
Should.
Oh, mass, I cannot tell.
Cudgel thy brains no more about it, for your dull ass will not mend his pace with beating. And when you were asked this question, maker.
Oh.
The houses that he makes last till doomsday. Go get it a yawn. Fetch me a stoop of liquor.
Aye.
All right, let's process the conversation between these two grave diggers, what they're talking about, where we are. First, whose grave are they digging? Ophelia's. The end of Act 4, there we go, sees the death of Ophelia. Now, there are questions that can be asked about how the queen knows as much as she does about this death. There are a lot of people that throw that ambiguity in with the queen's role as a whole. Did she maybe participate in the death of Ophelia? Did she watch it and do nothing? Like, how does she know all of this? I would say kind of push it to the side and just say she does. The purpose is exposition. We want to push her. I want to show her degradation here to kind of mirror Hamlet's. Here we see real madness from Ophelia, whereas Hamlet was always feigning it. And Hamlet has, of course, pushed times they saw each other. They're digging Ophelia's grave. So let's start with the first bunch of lines and the first sets of jokes. Now, they're not going to be the kind of jokes you're going to laugh out loud at. They're meant to be more humorous puns. What are they talking about in terms of Ophelia's death? Because she is the one, again, they are digging this grave for. Yeah. So they're asking this question about suicide because what's the nature of the graveyard that they are burying her in? Yeah. So since it's a Christian burial ground, this is still even found today, they sometimes will not allow suicides there because it goes against the faith. And so they kind of go through this idea of how she could be buried here if we know she died of suicide. And can anybody kind of explain what their thinking is and where the joke is?
The one that's titled Crone goes into this saying, so let's say a man is standing by a river. If he jumps in, he's committing suicide on himself. But if he stands and the water comes to him, then it's not. And so how is it possible Ophelia could have not committed suicide?
Yeah, they're basically trying to make the argument of like, well, how does she deserve? Maybe the water came to her. Maybe it wasn't suicide in that way. So they're kind of reasoning this out with logic, but they're presenting the flaw that we should all be asking about. Then they change topic for a bit, and they begin to talk about Adam, and they make jokes about the nature of their profession. And these are all based on Christian ideals, so they're meant to be somewhat humorous in that it's the idea of bearing arms. And if you don't have arms, how can you dig? And the scripture says Adam digged. So clearly he had to have had arms. It's a logic joke. They then present the last section of jokes, which talks about to ask the question, these frames past these other professions. Did you understand the idea of the gallows? Yeah, so exactly. So your gallows is just where they put people who are to be executed to death. So it's like, oh, the gallows maker, because thousands of people come through, they're tenanted there. Ha 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 ha. It's that dark humor that we're turning here. We're making jokes about things that really we shouldn't be joking about. But we know that often, especially in our culture, there are some people that just love to make those kinds of jokes and live in that section. And of course, our main clown here presents, no, that's not the best answer. The best answer is the grave maker, because his house lasts until doomsday. Of course, that Christian ideal that on Judgment Day, doomsday, all the dead will rise out of their grave. Look at that. Aren't you smarter than we think? We're going to transition here, and you notice we now have the gravedigger singing, and we are going to bring Hamlet and Horatio into this. We know that Hamlet was returning in Act 4 when he sent the letter ahead. So he is now walking into scene, and they're going to be presented with this odd thing. Here's a guy digging a grave, but singing a song. Shouldn't he be solemn? Shouldn't he be more serious about the work that he does? We also have to visualize something. When we think of graves, we literally have to buy a plot now. You know, you buy this section of land, and it's where you're going to go when you die. That was not the old sense. So in our section of Wuthering Heights for this week, for example, you will hear tell of the sexton. A sexton, or a grave digger in this time, would be the person who's in charge of the cemetery. And what they basically do is map where they roughly put people in the ground, but they also create loops. So let's say I'm going to start up here in the top corner and I'm going to work my way down, and then I'm going to create a new row as the sexton, and I'm going to keep varying. Well, once I hit here, I'm going to go back and go, all right, now we restart. So as this gravedigger is digging, he is going to be finding the bones of others who have been interred in that spot of ground. And in a lot of productions, he's literally throwing them or placing them out of the hole with some joking manner. There's not a whole lot of care that goes with this. And Hamlet's going to comment on that as well.
In youth when I did love thee, love.
Has this fellow no feeling of his business, but he sings grave making?
Custom hath made it in him a property of easiness.
Tis e'en so, hand of little employment hath the daintier sense. That skull had a tongue in it that could sing once. How the knave jowls it to the ground as if it were Cain's jawbone that did the first murder. It might be the pate of a politician, which this ass now or offices. One that would circumvent God, might it not?
It might, my lord.
Or of a courtier, which could say, Good morrow, sweet lord, how dost thou, good lord? This might mean my lord such a one that praised my lord such a one's horse when he meant to beg it. Might it not?
Aye, my lord.
Why, and so. And now my lady Worms, chapless, and knocked about the mazzard with a sexton's spade. Here's fine revolution, if we had the trick to see it. Did these bones cost no more the breeding, but to play at loggats with them? Mine ache to think of it. There's another. Why might not that be the skull of a lawyer? Where be his quiddits now, his quillets, his cases, his tenures, and his tricks? Why does he suffer this rude knave now to knock him about the sconce? Will not. This fellow might be in time a great buyer of land, with his statutes, his recognizances, his fines, his double vouchers, his recoveries. Is this the fine of his fines and the recovery of his recoveries? To have his fine pate full of fine dirt. Will his vouchers vouch him no more of his purchases, and double ones too, than the length and breadth of a pair of indentures? The very conveyances of his lands will hardly lie. There are sheep and calves that seek out assurance in that. Fellow.
All right, so before Hamlet and the gravedigger split words here, what is Hamlet commenting? Guy do his work. Presented, whether they are thrown out of the grave, placed along something like that. But notice that the questions he comes to are, was this person in life? When we're reduced to bone, we look no different than most others, unless there's, something that has happened in our life that plays out in our bones in some way. And so Hamlet asks these questions about, could this have been a politician? Could this have been a lawyer? Like, would that have earned him a better treatment when he is gone? And things like that. Think about why these questions are appropriate and important to Hamlet at this point. We're going to talk about it as he now engages the gravedigger and will ask him questions.
Whose grave's this, sirrah?
Mine, sir.
I think it be thine indeed, for thou liest it.
You lie out on it, sir, and therefore it is not yours. For my part, I do not lie in't, and yet 'tis mine.
Thou dost lie in, to be in and say 'tis thine. 'Tis for the dead, not for the quick, therefore thou liest.
'Tis a quick lie, sir. 'Twill away again from me to you.
What man dost thou dig it for?
For no man, sir.
What woman, then?
For none neither.
Who is to be buried in?
Is the gravedigger dumb? No, he's playing word games with Hamlet. And you notice he asks, whose grave is this? And, we kind of press that back and forth about who it belongs to. Before he then goes, is it for a man? No. A woman? No. Because in his definition, you can't be a man or a woman once you're dead. You're nothing. He's playing these games of semantics. And we notice that what Hamlet is finding is someone who is an equal to him. And so that opens up the possibility of this conversation that we can go into some depth.
We must speak by the card, or equivocation will undo us. By the Lord, Horatio, these 3 years I have taken note of it. The age has grown so picked. How long hast thou been a grave maker?
In the air, I came to it that day that our last King Hamlet, I came Fortinbras.
How long is that since?
Cannot you tell that? Every fool can tell that. It was the very day that young Hamlet was born. He that was mad and sent into England.
Aye, marry, why was he sent into England?
Why? Because he was mad. He shall recover his wits there, or if he do not, it's no great matter there.
Why?
'Twill not be seen in him there. There the men are as mad as he.
That would get a big laugh because this is Shakespeare here making fun of his audience. Remember, his audience at the time of his writing are all people who are British. So by him making the joke about, oh, well, if Hamlet doesn't recover his wits in England, it won't be a big deal. He won't be crazy to them because they're all crazy. Ha ha ha, we're all crazy. Ha ha, you're right. Realize who he's talking to. So notice that we have this little bit that Hamlet talks about with he says it as, the courtier, the peasant comes so near the heel of the courtier. These differences of social class are put to the side for right now. Instead, this is a mental thing. He recognizes that regardless of what this guy's status is, he is as intelligent as him. He can engage him in these things. And so he's almost finding that he's carried the burden of this play so far to be prince, to be recognized, to have this structure. Here he can just be dude and engage in this conversation.
How came he mad?
Very strangely, they say.
How strangely?
Faith, in with losing his wits.
Upon what ground?
Why, here in Denmark. I've been sexton here, man and boy, 30 years.
How long will a man lie in the earth ere he rot?
If he be not rotten before he die, as we have many pocky corpses nowadays that will scarce hold that laying in, he will last you some 8 year or 9 year. A tanner will last you 9 year.
Why he more than another?
Why, sir, his hide is so tanned with his trade, your awesome dead body. Here's a skull now. This skull was lain in the earth 3 and 20 years.
Whose was it?
A wholesome mad fellow it was. Who do you think it was?
Nay, I know not.
A pestilence on him for a mad rogue. I poured a flagon of Rhenish on my head once. This same skull, sir, was Yorick's skull, the king's jester.
This?
In that.
Let me see. Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times, and now how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rises at it. Here hung those lips that I have kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now, your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the table on a roar? No one now to mock your own grinning, quite chop fallen. Now get you to my lady's chamber and tell her, let her paint an inch thick, to this favor she must come. Make her laugh at that. Prithee, Horatio, tell me one thing.
What's that, my lord?
Dost thou think Alexander looked to this fashion of the earth?
E'en so.
And smelt so?
E'en so, my lord.
To what base uses we may return, Horatio. Why, may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander till he find it stopping a bunghole?
To consider too curiously to consider so.
No, faith, not a jot, but to follow him thither with modesty enough and likelihood to lead it, as thus. Alexander died, Alexander was buried. Alexander returneth into dust. The dust is earth. Of earth we make loam. And why of that loam whereto he was converted might they not stop a beer barrel? Imperial Caesar, dead and turned to clay, might stop a hole to keep the wind away. Oh, that earth which kept the world in awe should patch a wall to expel the winter's fall.
Okay, let's process this together and kind of look at what we have. So we have this grave digger that sort of matches wits with him. We get rid of the social status, we get rid of the fact that he knows anything about him, and instead we reflect on what's happening. And this one skull comes out of the ground. Whose skull is it? Belongs to Yorick. Now your notes tell you, and they kind of tell you, Yorick was the court jester. At the beginning of this, as Hamlet watches how he deals with the bones coming out of the grave, he's sort of in the abstract. Who could this have been? Would it have made a difference what this person's position in life was? The jokes between Hamlet and the gravemaker seemingly take away that idea of whatever you were in life matters no more here in death to the gravedigger. You're not a gender, infinite. Someone Hamlet knew. And so look at how as he holds the skull here, the famous image of the play, what is it that he's reflecting on? Huh? Life with him. And so he asks the questions, where are the things that I knew of you? Now as I just hold your skull, where are the things that made you, you? Again, skulls don't have a whole lot to tell us unless, you knocked your skull really hard or you fractured it at some point. You can still see the scars of it. So Hamlet's asking these questions. Why is all of that important now?
He foresees his future if he does kill Claudius, that he will be similar to these other bones that are just tossed away.
We know that the end of this journey is death. We have said tragedies end in the tragic figure's death. If you see the character's name on the title, you know they're done. So as we march Hamlet towards death here, he knows what's coming. And so how could we describe this theme that we're building? As he looks at this skull and wonders, where are the things that made you who you are? How do we describe that idea that persists after us?
Legacy.
This is all about legacy, because notice as he holds the skull and continues, where we left off even, he eventually kind of takes it down to this idea of, well, what happens to a skull in the ground? Well, it eventually disintegrates. It becomes part of all the rest of it. And he minimizes it to then this whole idea of becoming a cork. You would eventually be used to plug a hole, whether that's in a beer barrel, whether that's in a wall. He sort of minimizes it in that idea of, dust to dust. If you were someone and now you're just taking up a wall, now you're just plugging a hole in a beer barrel, what does that say about you? What does that say about any of the rest of it? How does that idea of you persist if your physical parts are so very minimalized? Hamlet doesn't want to think about this. He knows it's likely. He knows it's what's going to happen. He knows that's what the outcome is probably going to be. And as he's pushed here, notice that he moves away from the questions of legacy and he tries to minimize it with the whole thing of a joke. Boy, you take this great person, what do they end up being? A cork to plug a bung hole, as he says. But we get him here questioning his legacy. But what does he still not know? Did we ever answer the question about whose grave this is? So remember, he's coming in scene having no idea of what's going on right now in Denmark. And as we look at who is introduced here, we're going to bring in the king, the queen, Laertes, a coffin, priests, all of this procession, and we're going to have Ophelia's funeral right now.
Soft aside. Here comes the king, the queen, the courtiers. Who is it that they follow, and with such maimed rites? This doth betoken the course they followed did with desperate hand fordo its own life. 'Twas of some estate. Country a while and mark.
What ceremony else?
That is Laertes, a very noble youth. Mark.
What ceremony else? Her obsequies have been as far enlarged as we have warrantized. Her death was doubtful, and but that great command all sways the order she should in ground unsanctified have lost to the last trumpet. For charitable prayers, shards, flints, and pebbles should be thrown on her. Yet here she is allowed her virgin rites, her maiden struments, and the bringing home of bell and burial. Must then no more be done? No more be done. We should profane the service of the dead to sing sage requiem and such rest to her as to peace-hearted soul. Lay her in the earth. From her fair and unpolluted flesh may violets spring. I tell thee, church priest, ministering angel shall my sister be, when thou liest out.
What? Fair Ophelia?
Sweets to the sweet. I hope thou shouldst have been my Hamlet's wife. I thought thy bride bed to have decked, sweet maid, and not to have strewed thy grave.
Oh, treble woe. Or 10 times treble of that. Whose wicked deed thy most ingenious sense deprived thee of. Hold up the earth a while, till I have caught her once more in mine arms. Now pile your dust upon the quick and dead, till of this flat a mountain you have made toward top of Pelion, or the skyish head of blue Olympus.
Okay, so notice that Laertes enters this scene with these questions about what else. He keeps asking, what else are we going to do for my sister? Where's the rest of this ceremony? And it's the priest that has to check him. You're getting more than you deserve. Your sister, we know how she died. She doesn't deserve the burial that she's getting. Now, we want to make sure that comes from the priest, not the king, not the queen. They are doing all of this to right a wrong. Polonius was not given these kinds of ceremonial burial, this kind of ceremonial burial. The respect was not paid, so they're probably overdoing it here with Ophelia, but it needs to come from the priest. If it comes from the king or the queen, of sweets to the sweet farewell. And then Laertes here does what? He jumps into the grave. It still happens today. You know, we hear stories about in countries that still do that, and you know, the close jumps onto the funeral pyre because they can't imagine living without them. We see the keening that happens sometimes at funerals, the outpouring of emotion as someone, you know, loses it and like runs at a coffin and drapes themselves over it or doesn't quite know how to do. Here he jumps in and is over dramatic with his approach here. Bury us both. Oh. Now Hamlet is watching this. And we have to remember that Hamlet is one, processing the fact that this girl is now dead. Two, I probably pushed her to die. I can't, or at the very least, he's thinking, oh my God, I left this in such a bad place. And now he's watching her brother kind of in that role, and he's going to be like, oh no. Like, you think that you're in mourning? No one's in more mourning than me. And what we're going to get is a little measuring contest, a little bit of a sword fight between two guys that want to see who.
Stand like wonder-wounded heroes. This is I, Hamlet the Dane.
Take my sword!
Now fresh, I believe my fingers from my throat. Although I am not splintered and rash, yet have I in me something dangerous which makes
thy wiseness fear. Away thy hand.
Like them asunder!
My lord, be quiet! I will fight with him upon this theme until my eyelids will no longer wag.
My son, what theme?
I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not with all their quantity of love make up my sum. What wilt thou do for her?
Oh, he is mad, Laertes.
For love of God, forbear him.
Swoon, show me what thou do. What weep, what fights, what fast, what tear thyself, what drink of Isle, eat a crocodile. I'll do it. Dost thou come here to whine, to outface me with leaping in her grave? Be buried quick with her, and so will I. And if thou prate of mountains, let them throw millions of acres on us, till our ground, singeing his pate against the burning zone, make Ossa like a wart. Nay, and out mouth, I'll rant as well as thou.
This is mere madness, and thus a while the fit will work on him. Anon as patient as the female dove, when the golden couplets are disclosed, his silence will sit drooping.
Hear you, sir. What is the reason that you use me thus? I loved you ever, but it is no matter. Let Hercules himself do what he may. The cat will mew, and dog will have his day.
I pray you, good Horatio, wait a moment.
Yes, my lord.
Laertes, strengthen your patience in our last night's speech. You'll put the matter to the present push. Good Gertrude, set some watch over your son. This grave shall have a living monument. An hour of quiet shortly shall we see. Till then, impatience. Our seeding.
So we notice here as this scene ends, we need to get Hamlet and Laertes into a conflict of some sort. Or Shakespeare contrives it to be this battle over who mourns more, or who mourns more strongly. And so as they both jump into the grave, you do have to kind of picture that, yes, they are fighting over Ophelia's coffin between them almost. It's slightly comedic in the same way that is dark. I think it's going to find it a bit funny where it's like, really? Like, you're going to do that? We see Hamlet try to be alpha male here as he talks about how his love is so very strong. And of course, your mind goes, well, if your love was so strong, why'd you treat her so bad before? Why'd you never say it? I think part of it comes from the challenge of it here. You know, kind of like if you ever see, two over one girl. The guy might have shown zero interest for a long time. Then all of a sudden it's just like, no, man, she's mine. I love her more than anything. All of a sudden we want to post up. And Hamlet kind of does that. Look at how he throws out these challenges. Oh, how do you want to prove how much you love her? You want to drink vinegar? You want to eat crocodiles? Like, you tell me, man, I'm going to do it. And I'll beat you. And it sort of forces them into this conflict. And Hamlet says it as, I have lost a friend but gained an enemy. And of course, in everyone's mind, you're going, we've never seen Laertes speak to Hamlet ever in this play. We just put them into a conflict. And as we end the scene, notice that the king comes back to the reminder of Act 4. Hey, buddy, remember what we talked about in Act 4? Remember it. We'll come back to it. Don't worry. Like, we're going to have this fight. You're going to end up and we're going to put a living monument on this grave, Hamlet's body. So as we move into scene 2, which is the final scene of the play, we will kind of set up this battle to come and see our play move into the resolution phase. So if you will